Hello, hello. Welcome to the Five Talents Podcast. I'm your host, Abel Pacheco. I interview the top commercial real estate investors and industry experts so you can learn from their experiences. So if you're an investor, a high W-2 earner, or real estate or tech sales professional that wants to invest in real estate without having to manage properties or leave your day job, then this podcast is for you. Or if you're already investing in real estate, but you're doing it part-time and you want to become a full-time multifamily or full-time commercial real estate investor, this podcast is for you too. You're going to learn a ton. You will learn from real-life multifamily investors and other professionals in the industry. They're going to share their blueprints for success, and I'm super excited that you're here. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, hello. This is Abel Pacheco, your host for the Five Talents Podcast. We are super excited to have DJ McClure, an amazing guest that's going to talk to us a little bit about hidden NOI in flood zones. DJ, how's it going, brother?
Abel, I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Man, thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it. And it's exciting to have you because I've met with you from Peak Financing with Anton Matley, and you provided some really great insight and value. And I'm excited to, just hear a little bit more about now. So you're originally from Kentucky. DJ's the director of sales for National Flood Experts. They're an engineering firm, and they really specialize in these flood zone areas. So I don't want to mess any of this stuff up. DJ's a fantastic expert. Let me allow him to introduce himself. But we could start there. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll jump into a great conversation, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, I'm originally from Kentucky, and I just really wasn't a cold weather guy. So, my wife and I, we migrated south, and we're here in Florida. We are, and so I met the group with National Flood Experts, several years ago, and took some of my previous business development skills and brought it to our engineering firm. And so, we're based in Tampa, but we work with professional real estate, properties all over the country. And so we have a particular expertise. We work within a niche industry, if you will, working with properties in flood zones around the country. And so being an engineering firm, we have a particular expertise in finding properties that may be able to actually get taken out of the flood zone, or other opportunities to create some cost savings.
Yeah, that's awesome, because whenever I heard flood zone, I go, I don't ever want to buy a property in a flood zone. Just as a blanket statement is how I've kind of approached it, right? However, after talking to you, I realized, well, some of these flood zones are different than others. Certain markets or areas are different than others. And from an engineering standpoint, when you start to really look at it, there's opportunities to really buy a great asset where maybe somebody else has shied away from a little bit, and you may be able to help. So, okay, so this is going to be an awesome conversation. Tell us, your firm specifically. I hear engineering, and I don't equate those two things with flood zone right off the bat. What is an engineering firm doing in the flood zone space, and how does this all work?
Yeah, let me tell you the story. So our owner, Brad Hubbard, he's our original engineer. And so, during, kind of the economic downfall in the early 2000s, he actually started working in the insurance industry. And so working with properties in flood zones, naturally his engineering brain started kicking in, and he started just diving a little bit deeper into how the flood maps were created. And then his expertise grew from there. And so you found that there's really an overlap between the engineering world and the insurance, and there's a lot of opportunity always when you can find those overlaps. And so that's where our company was founded 7 years ago. And really the mission became, how many people can we help, get into the best financial position possible, whether to then be able to, save money on their flood insurance costs, but then ultimately, how do we help add as much value as possible to these real estate assets?
Yeah. Well, this is saving money or making money, whether I'm saving on that, it's all impacting the net operating income. And as we talk about commercial real estate, let's say specifically within multifamily for our area of expertise, I want to eke out as much extra income or reduce any expenses that I possibly can. So anywhere that I hear that there's savings, that sounds awesome. That's what increases our value. So tell us how your clients use you today. What's a typical, engagement look like, and how does it work?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing a lot of times is educating, because most people, like you said, they don't realize that there are things in the flood zone that can be changed. And so when we're looking at a property, we want to take a look at just kind of the whole situation. We want to understand down at the building level. You may have 20 buildings on a complex, and so we want to look at the elevation information for each one individually. We want to look at the current flood policy, the declaration pages that really give us the nitty-gritty information of how all that is working together to how they end up at that final ultimate price. And then so we're taking all this information, we're dissecting it, we're getting into the really granular level down to the 10th of a foot in some instances, really trying to see, can we get the flood zone changed for any of these buildings, which, as we talked about in on our first conversation, that removes the lender requirements for the flood insurance. So that in itself can be huge. But then for some of these other buildings, what can we qualify? What insurance scenarios can we uncover through the engineering information that might ultimately still reduce that cost?
Yeah, got it. Yeah, because whenever I hear, about, hey, this is in a flood zone, I may be thinking about, the whole entire property, right? But when you say talking about educating somebody on elevation levels, hey, there's 20 buildings, only 3 of them are there, and the other 17 are out of this flood zone, et cetera, et cetera. Just the education and knowing that you exist, your firm exists, your education on it, the engineering side of it, giving me the most amount of options is always better for an investor, is basically what I was trying to say. So that's great. So what are the most common things that you kind of see happening in this space, in this area for what you do? What do you the biggest aha moments that we see as investors?
Well, I think what would really surprise the most people is the markets in which we're able to do this. Because we're working along the Gulf Coast. We're working along areas where the Mississippi River extends out, through tributaries and creeks. We're doing things all around, the Florida and all the way up into the East Coast. So there really are no limits to the areas where we find opportunities, and I think that's what surprises most people.
Yeah, because if I'm thinking Houston, I'm thinking of Corpus Christi. When you said that Texas, let's focus on Texas because I'm here. So Corpus Christi, Houston, Galveston, all of these areas, and then I'm sure a lot of areas within San Antonio. I would never think of too many areas that flood, but I've seen it flood through the years, and it's just not something that I want to have to worry about if my property is underwater, whether I should have bought flood insurance or not. Right. So, okay. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we've done projects in all those markets. That's what's the most remarkable. And,
Yeah.
You're really just looking for anything that can reduce the cost. Sometimes it's changing the flood zone. Sometimes it's getting into the engineering of the property itself, and that can qualify an insurance scenario. And then at that point, we're working with the insurance carrier themselves to get the policies amended, and then the client sees a refund.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so to paint the picture of how to engage you and when should I engage you, the insurance brokers, for the most part, they're going to work in conjunction with you. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, we work in as part of the team. So they're doing one part of it, which is their expertise, and then we're coming into the picture and we're just diving a little bit deeper into the flood component itself, and then looking to find something that we can use to supplement what they're already doing.
Okay. And what are the illuminate a little bit for us, any rules or laws or kind of things about disclosing if I'm in a flood zone, or how does a new buyer know that they're in a flood zone? Does it have to be disclosed, Texas wise, that kind of stuff? And when should all of that, if you have any insight there?
That's a good question. I mean, what happens in some cases is that the selling owner may not have a mortgage, so he may not carry flood insurance, and so then it may not come into the picture until later in the buying cycle. I think really savvy commercial brokers that work in those areas, they know to look for that, and insurance brokers that work in those flood zone areas, they tend to look for that too. So it's something you should find out as early as possible in the buying cycle. But then once you find out, that's when you want to reach out to us and just start the conversation. There's a lot of areas we have done previous projects, so we can use our prior experience to give some insight into certain areas. In some cases, I've even looked at properties before that you might be buying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. It's nice to have a little insight beforehand if I can have it. Okay, great. So once we've identified it, now I'm talking to my broker and I'm having this question. And what's the difference between the work the insurance broker does and you all do as it pertains to this expertise?
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences is that we're an engineering company, so we're digging really deeply into all the data that's being used. Flood insurance itself, it's a very data-driven insurance. What's the base flood elevation of the area? What's the building type? What are the elevations of the buildings? A lot of those characteristics come together, and that's what equates to that final price. And so if one variable is the slight bit inaccurate for any reason, let's say it's a typo, that in itself could have a negative impact on that final policy price. And these aren't things that are anyone's fault necessarily, but you're essentially bringing us in to bring a microscope to all the different pieces of the equation. So we're dissecting the flood zone that the property has been placed in. We're dissecting all the data for the buildings, sometimes even sending our engineers out to the properties to gather new data. Before COVID, we were in Texas once or twice a month, working on different properties. And so bringing all that data in-house and then saying, okay, now what here is now coming to the surface? What solutions does this create?
Yeah. Okay. Makes perfect sense. And can you eliminate any idea of like costs, or is that more on the broker side of flood insurance? I've never bought a property that has had to have it, or underwritten a deal like that I was worried about enough. So I don't even have a frame of reference to that.
Yeah. So with flood insurance, you're paying, per building. And so, if you've got 20 buildings, you could have, depending on the age of the buildings, the type, the elevations, you could see things as cheap as, less than $1,000 per building, all the way up to, I've seen it as high as 20,000 annually for one multifamily building.
Wow.
So it can elevate in price very quickly, depending on certain variables. And so those are the things we're looking for.
Yeah.
What's missing in the equation, what's here that maybe under the surface that we can find to help.
Yeah. And when you say under the surface, what does that mean? Like explain this 20 building property, and one of them may be $20,000 a year. So that's very significant. And another one may only be $1,000. That's because the property may be stretched out over, a plat of land, and only portions of that apartment complex or apartment buildings are in the flood zone, and others may have less risk. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So you might have one building that's, when it was constructed, it was an elevated building. And so maybe they built it to where it's a couple feet above the flood zone. And so then from a risk standpoint, that would be considered less risk. And so then you'd have a cheaper policy. But things can change over time. The flood zone can have the elevation increased. And so that can then work against, some of the data. And that's where you get into all the different scenarios, and finding hopefully something there that can help create some savings.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let me do some math for those commercial real estate investors. They're like, well, why does $20,000 make so much? What's the difference? 1,000, 20,000. We're talking about $10 million building. Well, If we're talking about an annual rate, just one building at $20,000 a year at a San Antonio 5.5 cap rate, that's about $363,000 of value on the property, one building. So if you multiply that by, 5 of these buildings need 20, then that's $1.5 million worth of value. So if we're trying to figure this stuff out and say, well, all 20 buildings don't need flood insurance, or don't need the $20,000 a year flood insurance, and if we can save, and the other 10 buildings only need $1,000 a year, then that's the route we want to go. And so that's essentially what you're helping people understand and uncover, DJ. Is that right?
Yeah, so if we can get the flood zone changed and get the buildings into an X zone, in most cases they can qualify for a preferred risk type pricing, where instead of paying several thousand a building, they could pay as low as potentially $750 a building, on a rough number, and still have essentially the same coverage they had before. And so then you're still keeping the property protected, but you've found a little delta there between, say, 3,000-4,000 a building. Now you're at 750.
Got it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, thank you. Hello. You're listening to the 5 Talents Podcast. I'm your host, Abel Pacheco. If you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you're serious about achieving financial freedom. Are you ready to create your own path through multifamily investing for yourself and your family? Then I know you're going to appreciate our Investor's Guide to Multifamily Investing. It's titled Tackling Commercial Real Estate the Easy Way. We use this guide to invest ourselves in $93 million worth of real estate. So we're going to show you the basic mechanics of multifamily syndications and how to evaluate your next passive investment opportunity. So the best part, if you subscribe to our podcast now, leave us a review and a rating. I'm going to give you a free copy of our ebook. So please take a moment to do that now. Once you've done that, go to 5tcre.com/ebook, 5tcre.com/ebook. Make sure to let us know you left a review, and we're going to send you a free copy. So thank you so much for subscribing to the 5 Talents Podcast. We really appreciate it. And when you say move the flood zone, I always say, I always thought there's a flood zone. It's a flood zone. Like this is the area. What do you mean by moving the flood zone or looking at the building? Or maybe for the layman like myself, what does that mean?
Yeah, so let me explain. So when the flood zones are created, right, they're created at a macro scale. And so, you're taking large areas that they are, estimating this is what the water flow would be. This is the levels it would rise to. And so then we're going down at the micro level. And so land is obviously not flat. They figured that out a long time ago. And so.
Yeah, they did. That was a good one. Sorry, keep going, man.
So then with real estate development, for example, it moves at a faster rate than the updating of the flood maps. The flood maps only update about every 10 to 15 years, sometimes 20 years, depending on the area. And so you may have a property that got tore down and built new, but the flood zone doesn't automatically account for that. Or you may just have different areas like, Houston has a lot of, elevation increase and decrease. Mm-hmm. And so within one area, you may have several properties that, per the FEMA requirements, we can show that the data supports them being changed to an X zone.
Got it. And that's why the engineering part is valuable. It's I'm assuming there's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of data, a lot of charts, and then a lot of measurements on your side, probably machine, whatever equipment is used. But that is it's a site by site. Yeah, I'm in a flood zone on this big map, but really when I look at my property, I might be right on the top of a hill, and all the water is going down drainage on either side of my property. The least bit concerned with it flooding in my area, right?
Yeah, and the flood zones, they do a great job, and there's no errors here necessarily. It's just that you're looking at a finer level of detail, and so that's all that we're providing to FEMA is a finer level of analysis on a building by building type scale. And so then that allows them to then obviously add more accurate data into the flood maps.
So your work, every single property or every single engagement adds to the FEMA flood zones directly?
Absolutely. So when an area goes in to have a flood map update or revision, they're taking all the map amendments that were done in the past and they're taking it into account as they're updating and creating, the new, let's say 2021 flood map for an area.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm pretty simple at the most part. So I'm like, oh, how does that all work? That's how you're actually working with FEMA and saying, hey, this is this little spot right here. This acre tract, 2 acre tract, 5 acre tract is not. And, or there are variations of elevation, like you're saying. Okay. That makes sense. DJ Simple Mind is starting to grasp this process. So tell me more, something I would have no idea, like even to ask you in your expertise and area, like how do you help apartment, or multifamily commercial real estate owners? What are some of the other areas that you've seen us win by engaging a company like yours?
Well, there's all kinds of scenarios that we can uncover, and that's what's unique about our group is, we have overlapping expertises internally, both on the engineering and the insurance side. And so when you understand both worlds, it allows us to really uncover some solutions that normally may not get any attention. So, like, for example, we had a client in Houston. They had been put into what's called a severe repetitive loss program, meaning that they had multiple flood claims in the past. And so from an insurance standpoint, they're put into one of the higher risk categories.
Yeah.
They're paying, I want to say they're about $18,000 a building. There wasn't much they could do about that because the lender was requiring the policies. And so it was just cost of doing business. So we were able to identify a particular scenario within, some of the engineering of their property. We were able to work with the insurance carrier to get the rating of each individual building improved. And so they went from about 18,000 a building down to 3,000. Now,
wow.
The flood insurance requirement was still in place, right? We couldn't obviously change the flood zone in that case. But we worked with the carrier. We provided them some extensive engineering exhibits to support the scenario we felt they qualified for. And then they not only got them a refund back for that current year's policy, but they actually retroactively corrected them for several years in the past. And so it was a game changer for them last year.
You say retroactively corrected? They gave them money back?
In that case, they got refunded for 5 policy cycles.
Ooh, so, I like that. 5 years back. Wow.
It was a large sum that they got refunded.
Well, this is I'm glad I asked you that question because I wouldn't have known to ask or how to bring that out of this conversation. But even in that's freaking awesome because, somebody who has an existing property, this is not buyers, but if you're listening and you have a property and you're in a flood zone, that would be my first call after hearing this is to call DJ. So they called you, you worked with them, you did all this stuff we just talked about for 15, 20 minutes ish. And that's what you basically work with FEMA to do. FEMA adjusted those maps and said, yep, this is absolutely right, 100%. And then you took that expertise, worked with the insurance companies and said, hey, you guys have been charging a lot of money here for this particular area, but it's not quite the situation that it was in the past. And so they went from 18 grand to $3,000 a year. How many buildings?
I believe it was 12.
Holy moly. So that's just phenomenal.
So that particular case, interestingly, we didn't actually even have to do any of the work with FEMA because nothing in the flood zone could be changed because they were several feet below the flood elevation. Obviously, because you could imagine with the flood claims they'd had before. So in that case, we're working just straight with the insurance carrier. And so that's some of the 2 different types of projects we have. We're either working with FEMA to change the flood zone, or we're working with the insurance carrier directly to get the policy ratings improved. And between those 2, about 60% of the time, we're finding a solution for all the properties that we look at.
Man, what was the percentage again? I missed the number.
60%.
Holy moly, 60%. I was doing math on my iPhone here as you were talking, and I'm like, shoot, let me illuminate this for the other that are listening to. So 12 buildings, $15,000 a year each building. That's $180,000 for the year. Extra NOI, net operating income. Reduce the expenses and it goes straight to the bottom line. If they were in a market, I don't know, even the conservatives, let's just say it's a 6 cap, that's a $3 million increase. If it's a higher cap, lower cap, whatever, it's going to adjust. But everyone understands whatever cap rate you have in your property, take 180 grand and divide by your cap rate, and that would be the savings, or the value rather. The value of property is $3 million, saving 180K towards your cash flow every year. That's just amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that
And
example is great for your listeners because, they may think, well, I'm in a flood zone, there's no way they could help me. There's no way I'm going to get out of this flood zone. But,
Yep.
that case was that very same example. I think even when I first looked at it, I might have not even came back to that email until the next day.
and make sure this is right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so then there really is no property that's not worth our team reviewing. If you're in a flood zone and you're required to have flood insurance, or even if you paid off the mortgage and you're thinking about selling the property in the future, any property in a flood zone is worth our team giving a look. And the review is free. So if we don't find anything, then it doesn't cost the investor anything. And if we do, then we can talk about what those solutions might look like.
There you go. What a great service. What a great opportunity. And for anybody that's listening on the active side, is something that you want to look into. And then if you're on the passive side, if you're a limited partner, passive investor, and your operator says, hey, this is in Houston and Galveston and Corpus Christi, question may be, did you guys have flood insurance, or are you in a flood zone, or have you had this reviewed yet? Because that deal may get sweeter and may provide a little value to your general partner team if you suggested it. So that's great, man. That's
Absolutely.
great. What else have we not talked about that you think would be worth highlighting? Again, kind of may not even know how to ask you, but anything worth highlighting that we haven't discussed?
Well, I think that, talking about the acquisition disposition cycle, we touched on that a little bit, but the refinance is another area where a lot of our clients really see some huge, fruitful returns. And you've already alluded with, how the NOI impact can be, but, if you have anything that's coming up in the property, you're going to do potentially a refi this year, or maybe you're thinking about selling it down the road. Let's take a look at this sooner than later. The process for us can be anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks, to get these projects approved by FEMA. So we can work backward from those timelines. We can really position the asset well, for a strong valuation and for a high liquidable value.
Yeah. All right. Even on the refinance. Okay. So acquisition, disposition, refinance, all the way through. We know who to talk to. So thank you very much. Well, what's on the agenda? What's on the agenda next? Are you working on something specific, certain markets? Where's your company headed, and how can we help you in the future?
Well, we're doing projects all over the country at this point. You could imagine when we first started that, some of the Florida and Gulf Coast was where we naturally, started having our initial projects. But, we're working from California to the Northeast and everything in between.
All right. And so you, I guess, have local experts, or they're kind of on demand for you, or how does that actually work? Do you fly out there?
Yeah. So our engineers are licensed all over the country. And so that allows us to be able to work, in various markets. And, so at any given time, we have some of our team out on site at, some of the various properties around the country. But then much of the work we can do from here in our corporate office in Tampa as well.
Gotcha. And cost services, it sounds like you're going to have some savings for us. 60% of the time found some opportunities where we could save or make create extra value. But how much does the service cost and that kind of thing, or what are the fee structure, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're doing a flood zone removal project, it's 1 year's flood insurance. for the buildings that we can get approved by FEMA. And then if we're doing a consulting project, then it's just going to be, equal to the refund that we're able to generate. But, all our projects are 100% guaranteed, so if something were to go wrong, if FEMA were to deny the case, or the insurance carrier were to say, no, we don't agree, then we don't charge the investor anything at the end of the day. So
nice.
No invoice.
Well, I like a zero invoice if I don't get any value, and I'd be happy to pay if I was able to save for the next several years. I'll give you 1 year if you can save me money multiple afterwards. Well, that sounds great, DJ. Sounds great, man. Is there anything else we haven't hit on? Anything else you think we should highlight before we go?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'll just say that, there's a lot of hidden value in flood zones. And if you're an investor looking, I would say don't necessarily shy away from those. If you like the asset and it happens to be in a flood zone, then, let us take a look. Maybe there's something there under the surface.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll even engage you in the front end. And I'm a little more emboldened and I'm a little more empowered to not shy away, to at least look. I mean, in today's competitive market, that's big time. Just to even say, but let me take a closer look, or may have dismissed it in the past, because that is, any opportunity, any advantage I can get, even though we've just given away the secret now. But hopefully my competitors aren't watching too much, and we can go use it and buy another property. But I host a lot of my competitors on the show, DJ, because so it's a funny joke, and not really. But I have a lot of them on the show. But there's too many properties for me to buy. I'm in the abundance mindset. So I'm happy to help others see the value and highlight some expertise like you have, brother.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, where do we get in touch with you? How does the listeners and audience kind of reach out to you?
You can send an email to info@nationalfloodexperts.com, or if you'd like to reach out to me directly with a question, dj@nationalfloodexperts.com.
All right. Well, thank you very much, my friend. I really appreciate your time. It's been great chatting with you, and we'll see you on the next show. For everyone else, if this has provided you a little bit of value, a little bit of insight, which I know at least a little bit here, please go to our show, subscribe. And then if you have a property that you're working on, or whether acquisition, disposition, reposition, the man to talk to if you think you're anywhere remotely near a flood zone. And look forward to hearing from you soon. See you on the next show. Again, my name's Abel Pacheco. Thank you, DJ.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the 5 Talents Podcast with your host, myself, Abel Pacheco. Each week, we're going to bring you interviews from industry experts and commercial real estate investors who followed their dreams and achieved massive success. Before you leave, let me ask you a few questions. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you learn something valuable? Was your mind stretched to what's possible and what you can achieve? Do you want other experts just like the one you heard today? If you answered yes to any or all of those questions, then please take a moment to subscribe to the 5 Talents Podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and most importantly, leave us a written review. Tell us what you liked, tell us your favorite guest, give us any feedback. I'm excited to learn and improve so you can get a more valuable show. So thank you again for subscribing to the 5 Talents Podcast.